Hello everyone, it's been a while, hasn't it? I wanted to make a video updating you guys on what I've been doing since we last had a proper development log. It's almost the end of the year, so I thought I would do a 1-year recap of my progress. Now before I continue, let me just give you guys a brief explanation of what my game is about. Deck Tactics is a tactical RPG roguelike deck builder that takes place entirely inside a gamebook, inspired by Monster Train and Slay the Spire. I set out to make something similar but different at the same time. After I did some researching and prototyping, I eventually came up with the idea to use a grid board inside of battles. Having played a lot of Final Fantasy Tactics back in the day, I can't help but leverage some of my fondness for it and put it inside the game. What you basically do inside the game is summon units on the board, control them during their turn, activate their abilities using cards, and beat your opponent. That's basically what Deck Tactics is, a combination of a card-based strategy game and a roguelike deck builder, at least in terms of combat. In terms of aesthetics and narrative mechanics, Deck Tactics carries the soul of old gamebooks. A gamebook is a type of book that has readers participate in the story-making process, main menu changes. Now that we've introduced what Deck Tactics is, let's start by looking at its main menu from a year ago first. In the older version of the game, I had written a simple manual to teach the players how the game worked. There's a button here to access that manual, however. In the latest version, that button no longer exists since I scrapped it. I implemented a compendium sometime later which served to contain the tutorial, lore legends, and more. I'll talk a little bit more about the compendium later in the video, but for now, let's continue. Game start changes. If we open up the book in the older version of the game, it will bring the player straight to the map page. In the newer version of the game, it will bring them to the prep page instead of the map page. The prep page is a new page in the game book. Its function is to allow players to allocate their starting upgrade point before they start their run. After allocating their starting upgrade point, the player then opens the prologue page. In Slay the Spire, you get to choose a boon from this weird while named Meow at the start of the game. The new prologue page serves the same purpose, but instead of an outright reward or trade, it serves to change some aspect of the game's story and mechanic. Once the player goes through the prep and prologue pages, then the book will open up the map page. Map page changes. When the player opens up the map page, they are greeted with the map diagram on the left and the info sheet on the right. The map diagram shows you paths and nodes that the player can choose to engage with. The page on the right shows some information that I thought would be handy to have at a glance. Tabs on either side of the book will take the player to other parts of the book. The map diagram hasn't changed a lot when you compare it to the newer map. It still has that hexagonal gemstone look to it. However, the old one was put together using sprites, while the new one is drawn programmatically. I've also improved on the map's node generation. The previous node generation places nodes at random. There were fewer node types back then, so it didn't matter if the generation was complete chaos. The newer node generation has rules that prevent this. Now let's look at the info page on the right side. I opt to show a picture of what the floor would look like instead of the champion's portrait. My game doesn't offer that much visual flair. Hopefully, with this, the player at least has something that invokes their imagination. I removed the rest of the info on this page and moved it to the node's tooltips. I then filled the empty spaces with information about the player's health, energy, and inventory. Deck Manager changes. Let's look at the Deck Manager next. It changed quite a bit. The Unit Inspector, for instance, didn't show the stats of the units currently selected in the old version of the game, and neither did it have a rename button or an inspector button. The Card Inspector below it, which shows a preview of the cards, also didn't have the experience bar and the buttons to move, inspect, and drop the card. The biggest change for the Deck Manager is probably the Inspect function. There's an Inspect button on the Unit Inspector and Card Inspector. These buttons will open up the Detailed Inspector. When I implemented it, I called the Detailed Inspector the Stat Inspector. Back then, the purpose of the Stat Inspector was to allocate upgrade points obtained from units leveling up. Now, to give a breakdown of what a unit or card is, I repurposed the Stat Inspector and turned it into the Detail Inspector. If you look at the old Deck Manager, you will see several buttons on the top left page. I removed those buttons from the Deck Manager because they serve no purpose. Equipment Manager changes. If we go back to the map page and look below the Deck Manager tab, there's the Equipment Manager tab. Clicking on the tab will bring us to the Equipment Manager. Back then, the Equipment Manager had a different name. It was called the Artifact Manager. The Artifact Manager, as the name suggests, manages the artifact the player collects during their run. When I added items to the game, I repurposed the Artifact Manager and made it the Equipment Manager. The Equipment Manager lets you equip items and artifacts from your reserve stash. You can also drop and inspect items and artifacts in this window. Shop page changes. Let's go back to the map page. The last two tabs on the right are the map tab and the shop tab. we can ignore the map tab because we are currently on the map page. The shop tab, on the other hand, will bring us to the shop page. I haven't worked on the shop page since I've implemented it. However, shops have more types now. The synthesis shop combines cards to make a more powerful card, while the augment shop gives upgrades to cards to change their characteristics. The card shop remains the same. It will sell you cards and will always be present throughout all floors. I'm planning on replacing the card shop with something else later. I want the card shop to be on the map along with the rest of the other shops. In its place, I want there to be a main shop, one that is outside of the map and easily accessible. The new shop will feel a bit different from all the other shops that you could find on the map. Compendium. In the latest version of the game, an extra tab brings the player to the Compendium. Each time the player lands on an event node, an event will play out. The Compendium then records the event and stores it. The player can change the outcome of an event that has already played out. Some events can change the game in a significant way. It is through these manipulations that the players can carve advantages in battles. Battle system changes. Finally, let's look at the part of the game that I've been focusing most of my development time on, the battle system. We will start with the UI changes. Below the unit info viewer, there's a mini info viewer. I used to call the mini info viewer the hand viewer. The hand viewer shows the current cards in a unit's hand. The mini info viewer, on the other hand, displays additional information beyond the unit's hand, including the current amount of block, its affliction status and damage predictions. It also shows the player's inventory. Next up is item usage. The player can now use their items during battles. In the future, I'm planning on fleshing out the equipment mechanic a bit more, with the players being able to upgrade their bag in a shop or, at the start of the game, pick a bigger bag. Now, let's look at the enemy AI. I got the AI to work a long time ago using a state machine and my own messy algorithm. Back then, problems kept appearing every time the AI ran. Today, it's more stable and it doesn't constantly crash the game for unknown reasons. One of the major problems I had back then was the lack of understanding of what constitutes a goal and what constitutes an action for Go app. It's all good now after I rewrote the goals and actions from the ground up. I implemented the obedience mechanics for the AI. Each unit has their own obedience rating, and the player has a control cap that, if exceeded, will yield any summoned unit to the AI. This doesn't mean that the unit becomes an enemy. The player will simply lose control of that unit, and they will default to acting based on their behavior tag. The behavior tag is new to the AI. Behavior tags dictate the personalities of the units. A unit with the challenger tag and survivalist tag will attack the strongest unit on the board while not caring for units other than itself. The last change to the battle mechanic involves the unit stats. Back then you had your strength, constitution, intelligence, spirit, and speed, but balancing them was difficult because even small changes made a big impact. I needed something more granular to manipulate in order to get the numbers right. I divided the stats into base stats and derived stats. Now the base stats are strength, constitution, intelligence, spirit, agility, and dexterity. The new derived stats include attack, defense, magic defense, accuracy, evasion, critical chance, and speed. I also added a hit chance mechanic to the game. The mechanic uses agility and dexterity to determine a successful hit. It adds an extra dimension to consider when moving and attacking your opponents. Conclusion. Looking back, I think I focused too much on improving the battle system and not anything else. However, it's still a decent amount of progress. There's a lot more that I still need to do, but everything has been going smoothly, so I'm taking my time to develop everything properly. Anyway, thank you for watching until the end. Thank you to everyone who subscribed to the channel. We're nearly at 400 subs. If you find my game interesting, subscribe or hit that like button. This is Alan and see you on the next video.